Assalamu alaikum. Um, it seems like a very long time before since I started off with narratology. Today we're going to continue with from where we stopped. I believe we've understood in some detail about what narratology is concerned with, where it came from, what its various forms are as far as the various narratologists are concerned. So I believe you understand it as something that is concerned with telling stories, how stories are told, what its basic composition is, what makes it interesting, and we also, while discussing Aristotle, we understood that narration, narration of any story could be seen from various perspectives. While Aristotelian perspective is more at a philosophical or of a psychological kind, we've discussed at length about some of the concepts, not all. Some of the Aristotelian concepts is concerned with telling stories, hamartia, anagnorisis, peripete, and all those things. We did not see, and also you need to remember that we did not point out anything that that has to do with anything beyond narratology, beyond telling stories. So see, what we discussed is mainly concerned with the structural aspects of storytelling rather than the effects, effects of what the story would have on a reader or an audience. All right, as in, my point is that we are not talking about catharsis here. Catharsis is what kind of effect a play or any writing for that matter would have on a certain audience or a certain reader, especially in relation to tragedy, right? So, moving on, we saw some of these superficial aspects, of narratology where Vladimir Propp is concerned. So, Vladimir Propp's some 31 functions and 7 spheres of action we looked into, and we saw how they seem to be rather consistently followed by most writers in their writings, in their stories, in the storytelling. And these are not consciously done. You need to remember that these aspects are not consciously followed. They are just observed by Propp by using specific tests. Specific tests in this here would be the folk tales of Alexander, what's her name? Yeah, Alexander Afanassiev. Right? So, using those 31 functions, we saw that how they can be rearranged or in certain order. And with the spheres of action, with the 7 spheres of action that seem to focus on the characters, the characterization in the text, they seem to form a certain, what do you call it? You could call it the certain raw material of a tale, and not merely for fairy tale, but it could be applied to any kind of fiction, any kind of storytelling, whether it be a novel, a full-length novel, or a novella, or a novelette, or short story, doesn't matter. Now, finally, we come to Gerard Genett. Now, Gerard Genett's idea of narratology is something that goes beyond both the physical, both the superficial level and the philosophical or psychological level of storytelling. Because see, Genett focuses on not about the repercussions of certain actions or what kind of characterization goes into the making of a story, of the telling of a story, or what kind of actions seem to concur together. That's not the point of Genett. Genett seems to focus on how the how of it, the how the story is told, how it is revealed, HOW, how. That seems to be the operative word for Gerard Genett. So he questions on what kind of mode it is, as in whether it is mimetic or diegetic, basic narrative mode. He asks how is the narrative focalized, as in the point of view. Here, focalization would indicate the point of view or the perspective of the story, of the narrative. Okay, how is it narrated, and who is telling the story? I mean, he asks whether it is the author or the narrator, and how is the narrator different from the author? Yeah. And he asks, how is time handled in the story? Time handled in the story, whether it is, from beginning to end, or end to the, or starts somewhere towards the end and goes backward, or is there a big movement from flash forward, and flash backward, or in media stress, something like that. And he also speaks about how the story is packaged. Packaged as in, remember when we were talking about Poe's The Oval Portrait, how there is this one frame narrative within which there is an embedded narrative. Remember? So how the story is packaged, whether it is open-ended, whether it is close-ended, is there a frame, is there a single narrative alone, or is it a double narrative, or are there subplots to the main plot, or is there an existence of several subplots, and how they seem to affect or move the main plot forward? All of these questions, Janet seems to focus on. And also, how are speech and thought represented? How are speech and thought represented, as in like whether they are tagged or direct or indirect, with untagged, whether there is a person visible for the speech. I mean, do you actually find a person speaking a certain thing, or is it just implied? Is it explicit or implicit? The speech in the text, speech in the story, speech in the narrative. Now you could say that she ordered her so and so. Yeah, she ordered, go and do this, or then or she was ordered to do certain thing. So you see, with you can question from a narrative, from the narratology perspective, Gerard Genet's narratological perspective. You could question whether it is direct, indirect, tagged, untagged, howsoever it is presented. You can question those aspects. I believe, yeah. So moving forward, yeah. So you need to understand that Gerard Genet seems to be the most recent of narratologists after Roland Barthes, who focuses not on the tale itself, but how it is told, which is to say the process of telling itself. The process of telling itself. Let me get my marker here. Brush. Okay. So you see, it focuses on the process of telling itself. What is meant by its distinction will become apparent if we consider 6 particular areas. So there are 6 main areas that we'll be looking at, as I said, as I have mentioned, listed out earlier. There are 6 main points. Okay. In his book, Narrative Discourse, please remember this one particular work of Genet. Okay, he seems to have written plenty of books, but this seems to be the one that is most focused upon, most talked about. So there are some 6 basic questions that is asked about in active narration, and each has the range of possibilities identified by Genet, with some supplementary categories of Barry's own. All right. So the first question that Genet seems to ask, and Peter Barry notices, is that if the basic narrative mode is mimetic or diegetic. We've already discussed at length about what mimesis is, what diegesis is, right? So mimesis is something that is told, right? And shown. And diegetic would be something that is told, right? So see, Genet discusses this matter in the chapter 4, Mood. Mimesis means showing or dramatizing how things happen. You've seen mime shows, right? What is mime? Mime is an act that is put on stage for you to interpret yourself. So you are not told that so and so, such and such thing is happening, but you are simply shown. And it is up to you to understand, it is up to you to interpret or recognize the act itself for what it means. Right? That's what mime shows are about. So you can, I believe you can associate now to mimetic to mime, right? So when we speak of mimetic here, whether it is mimesis, we are concerned with whether the tale itself is showing things to you, showing the story to you. Is the story being dramatized in front of you, or is it diegetic? As in, are you being told the story? Like, for instance, say I start off with, once upon a time, long, long ago, there lived in a forest a king and a queen. Right? Okay, king and queen don't have to live in a forest. Probably they are at exile. This is something I'm telling you. Okay? This is being told to you. King asks, "Where's my dinner?" And the queen replies, "Oh, well, the servant has gone to get it for you. You better keep your temper down." So, you see, this act is something that you are actually witnessing. Now, see, for the first time, maybe for the first one or two instances, it may be mentioned the name of the king, or just the king said or queen said may be mentioned. But after that, you may notice that there is an absence of any name beside the dialogue, okay, beside the sentence spoken within the inverted commas. Right? So it implies that you are watching the action take place firsthand. Okay? Watching the action take place firsthand, in the sense you are looking at the reading. I mean, when you are a verbal image is created, a verbal imagery is created in your mind that shows the action happen. All right. So that is mimetic. So you see, the parts of a narrative which are presented in mimetic manner are dramatized, which is to say that they are represented in a scenic way with a specified setting and making use of dialogue which contains direct speech. So mimesis has direct speech, whereas now mimesis is slow telling in which what is done and said is staged for the reader, creating the illusion that we are seeing and hearing things for ourselves. By contrast, diegesis means telling or relating. Okay, so diegesis would mean that it is being related. Long, long ago, once upon a time, there lived so and so is diegetic, whereas the conversation between the king and the queen is mimetic. You get the difference, right? The parts of a narrative which are present, the aim is to give us essential or linking information as efficiently as possible without trying to create the illusion that the events are taking place before our eyes. So when we are speaking of, in terms of diegesis, the idea is that you are not given the illusion of things happening right in front of you. Whereas in mimesis, that's the case. While text is mimetic, you actually feel like it is happening right before you. So a verbal imagery is created through the words, and you can actually feel that actual interaction is going on between these people. All right, so two friends are sitting close by the fire. Yeah, an image is created in your mind. All right. So in diegetic actually focuses on giving essential information. All right, essential information or linking information. Linking information as a story cannot go on in terms of dialogues alone. If that happens, it would cease to be a story. It would become a play. It would become a drama. You get my point? The same goes for, like, if it's a short story, it would turn into a play. See, imagine if it's a novel, and the entire novel consists only of dialogues. You'll be fed up. You won't have any linking information at all. How would you realize that who's talking, what's happened, what is the context in which the talk is going on? You won't know. So diegetic plays the part of giving you the essential or the linking information for the dialogues, for the mimetic parts. For the mimetic parts, parts that show you the story. All right. So in practice, of course, writers use the two modes in tandem, moving from mimetic to diegetic and back again for strategic reasons. This is partly because an entirely mimetic novel would tend to be infinitely long, and an entirely diegetic one could hardly be more than a couple of pages and would read like a plot summary. See, imagine if there were no dialogues at all. What would happen to Pride and Prejudice? Right? What would happen to Jane Eyre, what would happen to any other novel for that matter? It would be finished off in like in less than maybe 20, 30 pages max. Right? Because there are no dialogues, there is no interaction between, okay, the interaction is merely reported about. It is not performed. It is not performed for you to see for yourself how they seem to interact. Yeah? How Darcy seems to treat everyone with utter disdain, and how Elizabeth Bennet seems to be constantly cheerful despite all the ridiculousness that she finds in her own family, and even despite her embarrassment, how she seems to hold on to her dignity. Yeah? And cheerfulness, not the serious, grave kind of dignity, but the kind of dignity that and that keeps her cheerful, despite all the things that are all the accusations hurled on her family. See, that is possible only when you actually see the dialogue, so that the interaction between Darcy and Bennet. Okay, it is not possible. It cannot simply be stated. There wouldn't be anything for you to appreciate if it's simply reported to you. It would sound like a plot summary, you know. When you summarize, when you're asked to write a critical understanding, critical appreciation of a certain novel, you end up merely writing a summary of it, not critical appreciation. We tend to do that, right? Well, anyway, the point remains that there is a blending required, whether it be novel or a short story. There is a blending required of both mimetic and diegetic modes. Okay, mimetic and diegetic modes. Isn't like this is one small example given here. This example has been taken by Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, which is a single take account of an American couple waiting for a train at a remote Spanish railway station. So their thoughts, words, and actions as they wait reveal the crisis in their relationship. Okay, so you have to read it to get the idea of what kind of crisis their relationship is going through, has reached, and we see what they do and hear what they say, and that is all. But the longer structure of a novel usually requires a blending of the mimetic and diegetic, and the following brief passage illustrates a glide between the two modes. Like, okay. So here, this is one passage. See, for 5 years, Mario took the same route to work every morning, for he never saw Thelma again. Then, one morning, something very strange happened as he came out of the tube station and began to walk up Charing Cross Road. It was a bright, sunny day. And see, this is what I was talking about. Now, the other dialogues that we were looking at from the book, they were not from Hemingway's work. So this I found over the net. Look at this. Now this is a conversation between a girl and a man, and they both seem to be Americans, and they're at a Spanish Madrid railway station or something. And they seem to have a conversation which is so abstract and obtuse that you would have a hard time deciphering what they exactly mean. Okay, this goes much through the absurd kind of writing. It's sort of surreal, but then you do get the implication of what is being said and what the relationship between these two are, and you get a hint. I mean, of course, there is a sense of deliberate ambiguity created with these abstract dialogues. Okay, something else is happening here, I'm sorry. So you see, they look like white elephants, she said. I've never seen one. The man drank his beer. No, you wouldn't have. I might have, the man said. Just because you say I wouldn't have doesn't prove anything. The girl looked at the bead curtain. They've painted something on it. What does it say? Anistel Toro. It's a drink. Can we try it? See, okay, this is just a very brief glimpse of, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize for the interruption, and honestly I forgot where I stopped. So I'll just move on with where I assume I stopped. So we were talking about how there is a blending of both diegetic and mimetic modes in operation, while a narrator brings in some narrative focus, or tries to bring in some narrative focus, right? So we had this one small example of a text wherein there are two characters. We see Mario and Thelma. Mario and Thelma, they seem to be probably the protagonists, the main characters. And instead of jumping straight away to the moment of action, we are given a gist. A long story is shortened. It's just told to us in two short sentences. Like, for 5 years. Now, 5 years is cut down to the length of one sentence, right? One phrase. For 5 years, Mario took the same route to work every morning. So a pattern is set. A pattern is set for you so that you could assume, you could frame a certain structure for that character in your mind, right? So when the actual action takes place, it is supposed to be something, a variant of what is a routine, what has become a routine, right? What is routinized. But then you've actually come to a point where you realize that something extraordinary is happening here. Ordinarily, he is used to taking a certain kind of train at a certain point of time and his routine hasn't changed the last 5 years. But all of a sudden, some change occurs, some change begins. And that's where mimesis come into play. Okay, so the first sentence is Diegetic, a rapid summary of a long sequence of events, but all taking place off stage. It's as if, there is probably a narrator standing behind the stage or standing at the sidelines and telling you what has happened so far. And coming to the point, now this is what you as an audience gets to observe. Well, here in this case, the audience is a reader. A reader, as in you are reading the novel, but then you are actually seeing what has happened. You're just getting a glimpse of what has happened so far, and automatically you are pushed to the present with a background idea, background information. Clearly, it would be impossible to move a plot along efficiently without passages of this kind, because you cannot put everything into dialogues. Everything cannot be stated in dialogue form, because it would end up being a play. Or if you remove all the dialogues, and if everything has been just told to you instead of acted out for you, it would turn into probably a plot or a summary of a text. All right. So it wouldn't seem like a novel or a story anymore. The descriptiveness would be reduced. The descriptive quality of the text would be reduced considerably. Now, moving on, the second point that Gerard Genette seems to focus upon is focalization. Focalization is how is the narrative focalized? Okay, what is the perspective, from which point of view you get to observe you get to observe the action taking place, whether it is given in the first person, whether it's in the second person, whether it is an internal focalization, whether it's an external focalization, whether it's a zero focalization, whether it's you must have read about in creative writing. In creative writing, I believe there are all kinds of perspectives, point of views. There is the first person narrative, second person narrative, omniscient narrator. Omniscient narrator would be someone who's just a voice, who stays there somewhere around the story, but is not a part of story, who has access to all the characters, what they do, what they see, what they think, and what they feel all together. So that would be an omniscient narrator, right? So, okay, I'll come step by step. But I'm sorry, I'm getting another call. Once again, I apologize for the interruption. It seems to be unavoidable. Okay. The other option would be for me to put my phone on aeroplane mode. In that case, no one will be able to reach me, and well, that could turn out not so in my favor. So anyway, the second point is that how is the narrative focalized, right? That's what we were talking about. So basically, on the surface, there are two kinds of focalization. One is the internal focalization. Obviously, the other would be the external focalization, right? So when we speak of internal focalization, it would be mostly someone from the text, okay? So someone from the text, as in, like, it could be a character. Now the character could be the main protagonist, or it could be just about, like, remember Moby Dick. where the narrative is not from the protagonist perspective. The protagonist here is, yeah, sometimes we do get confused about who the protagonist is. It seems like Ishmael is the protagonist. Sometimes we feel, but actually the protagonist of the text is Captain Ahab, right? I think I'm right. I don't know. Anyway, so you see, it need not be the main character who does the narrative. It could be a subordinate character, or it could be the lowest of the low, who seems to observe it from the third point perspective, who doesn't have any major role to play, but still is an objective outsider who gets an objective view of the events taking place, so that you get to decide upon the morality or whatever aspect. You're not told how to think. You get to think for yourself. You're just given some facts on which you base your assumptions, base your ideas. All right. So basically, there are external and internal focalization. Internal focalization of various kinds, whereas external focalization is a viewpoint outside the character depicted. So there may be plenty of characters, but the voice of the narrative would be something that is disembodied. Disembodied as in, like, there won't be, you won't exactly find any character speaking it. Okay, sometimes people do get confused about this kind of narrative because they assume it is the author speaking. It's not the author speaking, honestly. An author cannot speak like that. Because, who's that? Scott Fitzgerald. Remember The Great Gatsby? So if you read A Great Gatsby, you'd actually find that it is full of one particular perspective that would not be the author himself. The author has this very distinct voice when he writes his prose text, or his translation of what's that? Umar Khayyam. Yeah. Rubayat of Umar Khayyam. Remember? So see, the author himself has plenty of distinct voices when he writes. He becomes an entirely different person. He takes up the person of an entirely different narrator when he is treating the Rubayat, when he is translating the Rubayat. Once again, he becomes an entirely different person when he is talking about the novel itself. When he is narrating the events of Gatsby. Who's that character? Once again, I'm forgetting the character. Anyway, my point is that the author and the narrator are two different entities, and let us not get these two confused. The author is himself, the person who is writing. The narrator is the teller of the story within the story. Okay, teller of the story in the text. Okay, so they are two different, distinct entities. Let's not get those two confused. Anyway, I guess I'll stop here and continue in my next class because I'm running out of time and I've got a long way to go. Thank you so much for your patient listening. I know it's kind of abrupt. I'm leaving it in the middle, but we'll deal with this again. Point 2, after your tests. Okay, by the way, you've got your tests starting on Monday. So start preparing for your stylistics. Thank you so much. Take care. Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.